And we are rolling on June 1st, 2017, where a very historical thing has happened. The President of the United States, President Trump, has made the decision to withdraw the United States from the Paris Accord. Breaking news. You've had two articles given to you, one from the Atlantic today and one from the Wall Street Journal, which I would like you all to know paragraph by paragraph by the next time we meet. Today we're going to continue our discussion of climate change and take a slightly different tack and look at the relationship between science and politics. In particular, we're going to ask and answer the question, I hope, the politicization, boy, that's a fancy word, of science is undesirable. Speaking for the government first will be Sarah, who asked a very excellent question at the BDS today. And Cameron will be her wing woman. Is that proper right? Wing mate? Wing person? Is that the best way to refer to it now?
Wing woman's totally fine.
Wing woman? Okay, wing woman. And on the opposition will be speaking, the leader of the opposition is Genevieve, right? And the member of the opposition will be Alan. So without further ado, let's call this house to order. And let us, I'm missing Cameron today. So where's my loyal timer? Can you time today? Hello. Thank you.
Always.
Hi, Jen. Okay, Jen will be timing. She'll be giving it to you with hand signals and yelling out the time as well.
Okay. Hi, my name is Sarah, and today my partner Cameron and I will be arguing that the politicization of science is in fact undesirable. So let's start with the definitions. Both teams have agreed to this. The politicization of science is defined as taking science and putting it in the inner workings of government and vice versa, and undesirable shall be defined as not wanted. The value is that of doing the most good to the most amount of people, and whichever side can show that their side does more harm or good on a given scale will win the debate. So let's get right to it. I have three basic arguments as to why mixing politics and science is not only undesirable but also dangerous, similar to that of mixing church and state. First, politicians are not scientists, but rather are bureaucrats and are therefore unqualified and uneducated to be involved in scientific decisions. Second, politicizing science is a danger to democracy. And third, the politicization of science clouds and corrupts the truth. So, first, politicians are uneducated on science and have even proven this themselves. According to a Congressional Research Service in 2012, among the 435 members of the House, there is one physicist, one chemist, one microbiologist, and that's it. There is one member in all of Congress who has a PhD in any science field, and that's Bill Foster. And if you look at certain websites, I know there's a big thing going around, especially in this presidential election, like factcheck.org. It's not just about factcheck.org. They have a whole other website called SciCheck, and many other websites completely devoted to checking what politicians say about science. Thousands of articles are published, all mostly disputing incorrect claims that politicians make about science. A quick Google search will yield thousands of results. If you type in stupid things politicians say about science, it's unfathomable, and it's almost ridiculous that they're involved in so many scientific decisions. Second, politicized science is a danger to democracy as it allows the government to control us and not vice versa. A big example of this is that of eugenics. Many of us know eugenics maybe of what happened in Nazi Germany and what led to many millions of Jews being exterminated in the concentration camps, in which scientists in the government deemed Jews as an inferior race and thus needed to be dealt with. and ultimately killed. But it didn't only affect Nazi Germany. In fact, it actually happened here in the US. In our home state of California, unfortunately, thousands of people were sterilized forcibly because they were deemed as inferior as part of the United States' scientific pursuits. But in reality, it was their way of promoting their own agenda. Also, the politicization of science allows government officials to manipulate and twist the facts that get out there to pursue their own agenda. For example, the Bush administration, you gotta give it to Bush, was widely accused of a scientific report that was widely accused of withholding scientific reports that did not help their political agenda. In 2004, there were almost 10,000 scientists who testified that, quote, when scientific knowledge has been found to be in conflict with its political goals, the administration has often manipulated the process through which science enters its decisions. Additionally, quote, we have reports that stay in draft form and don't get out to the public. We have reports that are changed, written, or ignored. Anything that doesn't fit into the political agendas, appointees, ideological or theological political agenda is often ignored, marginalized, or buried. That's what the Surgeon General testified under oath about the Bush administration. Which leads me to my next point, that politicized science clouds and often corrupts the truth. So politicized science promotes scientists not just to discover the truth, but to discover what the politicians funding them want to be discovered, quote unquote. So for example, there's a big discrepancy between what's in the IPCC's reports and what some of its leading scientists say and believe. Why is this, you may ask? Well, just look at Rule 3 of the IPCC's procedure, which states that documents, quote, documents should involve both peer review by experts as well as review by governments. The IPCC policymaker summaries, which are the summaries that the media relies on, are produced by a committee of approximately 50 government appointees, many of whom are not scientists. These political appointees are given actually considerable latitude to modify the scientific reports to their liking. According to reports in the UK's Telegraph, as well as other sources, leaks reveal that the policy-making committee has requested approximately 1,500 changes in the text meaning the science, on behalf of their government leaders that they represent. So I ask you, would you want to bet on the scientific integrity of such a report? Another example, Michael Mann is the controversial director of Pennsylvania State's Earth System Science Center. And he was at the center of the 2009 ClimateGate scandal, in which emails were uncovered from climatologists discussing how to skew scientific evidence and even blackmail experts who didn't agree with them. Now here's the catch. Mann received some $6 million, mostly in government grants, according to a study by the American Spectator, including $500,000 in federal stimulus money while he was under investigation for the ClimateGate scandal. So, to conclude, whatever benefits can potentially come out of the interweaving of government and science, which I'm certain our opponents will try and convince you of, the strings that are attached and the harmful effects that come with it undoubtedly outweigh them. Additionally, while I have just pointed out that the politicization of science is dangerous and brings far more harm than the potential good, my partner Cameron will discuss how the free market and the private sector is not only capable of producing anything that the public sector can produce in science, but has done so in the past and will continue to do so. So thank you, and I now stand open to cross-examination and points of further clarification.
Thank you very much. Can you yell out the time? I didn't know what the time was.
There was 40 seconds left.
There's 40 seconds left. Oh.
Sure.
Okay. Okay, would you stand close together, please, and face the chair and not look at each other? Thank you. Okay.
You ready?
I'll be ready.
So you stated that in your side check there's a whole website that basically shows how politicians make fraudulent claims, correct?
Sometimes they're fraudulent, sometimes they're correct, but it's basically about checking whether or not they're correct.
Okay. Have you ever heard of the Office of Technology Assessment?
No, I haven't.
So this was in the 70s. There was a whole office that was dedicated to this. It was part of the government that was connecting scientists and politicians together to make sure that there were no claims or policies that violated scientific evidence. would you say that this is some sort of politicization that would kind of make side check not really necessary?
No, I wouldn't. Because,
Look at me, look at me. I'm the guy you're trying to persuade. Okay.
based on what you said, it was created by the government, and so I don't trust an organization created within the government to monitor the government, to monitor itself. You need an outside organization, something not affiliated with the government, to say whether or not this is correct. There's a lot of bias involved. I wouldn't trust it.
Do you trust scientists?
It's a very vague statement. I think most scientists I trust. A lot of them, unfortunately, I don't.
So if there was an office made up of scientists, do you think it could be trustworthy?
I would have to see what kind of scientists. Do they go through a sort of screening? Do they have political leaning? There's a lot that's involved in that question.
It's true, there is a lot. A majority of Americans do believe, though, that most scientists are nonpartisan. That's actually about 64% perceive them neither to be liberal nor conservative in this Office of Technology Assessment. Do you think that's persuasive whatsoever to find them as verified evidence?
I did see that statistic, and my response is that unfortunately Americans' perception is not always the same as truth. Specifically in this case, I actually read studies, although Americans perceive that, unfortunately they're correct. I actually read a study from a Pew Research Center that out of all scientists, 4% consider themselves Republican, 55% consider themselves Democrat, the rest are either independent or, quote, don't know. So unfortunately Americans, what they perceive isn't true, according to the Pew report.
Okay, thank you. I have also was wondering, so the Bush administration, that's pretty awful what they did. I'm wondering, is this is this what happens a lot during administrations? Is that what the scientists said during that petition that you quoted?
The person I quoted who testified against the Bush administration only testified against the Bush administration. However, the Clinton administration was also in trouble for doing the same thing. The Surgeon General, I have his specific quote in my brief if you want. He also testified against Bill Clinton for withholding certain scientific facts that didn't go with his agenda.
Are you talking about the needle sharing agenda that insinuates heroin use?
I am not sure. I can check in my brief. If that's what you've learned, of course I'll take your word for it.
Thanks. The rest of the quote of the petition did state how other administrations have on occasion engaged in such practices, but not so systematically nor on such a wide front. Do you think that would make the Bush administration unique in whatsoever in that case?
No, I still stand by whether it's systematic or not. If it's happening, we got to deal with it. And it happened in the Bush administration as well as the Clinton administration. And who knows how many other administrations. I just pointed out 2 presidents in the last 40 years alone.
What's the time?
They're out of time.
Okay, Jen, scream it out.
This went off and I screamed.
Scream it out more, okay? Good. Okay, thank you. Okay, the chair will now recognize the leader of the opposition for a speech not to exceed 7 minutes in length. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Hi, my name is Genevieve, and today I'll be discussing that not only is the politicization of science desirable by the majority of Americans, but is actually beneficial to our society. I'm going to be explaining this in a multitude of ways. The first is I'm going to explain how politicizing issues creates action and discovery that benefits humanity. I'll show this in a non-scientific event as well as a scientific event. I will also explain how the majority of Americans and scientists do believe science and scientists should be involved in the inner workings of government. This will include scientists being a part of policy changes, as well as scientific research receiving funding from governmental sources. Because the politicization of science does include government funding for scientific research, including the institution we're sitting in today. I will also explain how there's currently a large demand for the politicization of science according to our current administration. First of all, politicizing science makes action happen and creates good in the world. Politicizing issues in a nonpartisan sphere has worked to create action to promote a better quality of life for humanity in the past. Did you guys know that before the 70s, a woman could be beaten in her home and no one would do anything? This is domestic violence. No police officer would go in because it was deemed a private matter. Jackett, an assistant professor of history and women's gender studies at Louisiana State University, wrote how it wasn't until this grassroots feminist activist movement that involved formerly battered women took the streets, held signs that said, "We will not be beaten," and exposed domestic violence against women to incite change. What happened after this? The U.S. Commission on Civil Rights named over 300 shelters, hotlines, and groups advocating for abused women, along with many other legislative reforms. It was not until domestic violence became politicized that this issue left the private sphere and brought it into the public, nonpartisan place where action can be taken and a better quality of life can be promoted. This has happened in a scientific sphere as well. Government-funded science has in the past led to plenty of discoveries that creates good in society. And without this government funding, who knows if these lives would be saved? For example, in a research study in New England Journal of Medicine, they've found that virtually all the important innovative vaccines have been introduced during the past 25 years. This is 15 vaccines, have all been governmentally funded research projects. This includes vaccines for hepatitis A, B, and HPV. HPV leads to a multitude of cancers, including cervical. Without these government-funded projects, who knows if these vaccines would have been discovered and lives saved. The politicization of science is desirable by the public and by scientists. Pew Research Center conducted a survey that found a large majority of the public, 76%, and nearly all scientists, 97%, say that it is appropriate for science to become actively involved in political debates on controversial issues such as stem cell research and nuclear power. I agree with the affirmative. Politicians, lawyers, they do not have the education to make scientific calls in policy. Scientists do. How can something be deemed undesirable if most of the public, as well as the educated scientific community, believe it to be appropriate and wanted? Not only that, but the Pew Research Center conducted a survey where a majority of American adults supported government funding in basic science research, believing that it pays off in the long run. 71% of them. That's 7 in 10 Americans believe that scientifically research based off government funding is beneficial for them and pays off in the long run. I'm not a math major, but that is the majority. Finally, currently there is a demand for politicization of science to further the good of the public. Without protection and avoidance through politicization, science will be ignored, just how domestic abuse was ignored for so many years. Donald Trump's plans for the new budget include cuts to the Environmental Protective Agency, that is responsible for ensuring our drinking water and air keeping clean, and the National Institute of Health cut by 18%. That's $6 billion. Who does the National Institute of Health fund? The National Cancer Institute. These people are they're researching how to cure cancer, that they will not have adequate funding to do so. One might read into this and see this as a downside of science being determined by politics, but if anything, it shows that there needs to be a louder voice defending it. Policy advancements occur when there has been political defenses for the politically defenseless, as I've previously mentioned. However, the scientific community is currently responded by finding back in the public's political sphere. The March for Science, April 22nd, 2017. We saw 100,000 people march, let alone in D.C., filled of the scientific community and the supporters of the scientific community. What did they ask? Well, their mission statement online says that they are united as a diverse, nonpartisan group to call for science that upholds the common good and for political leaders and policymakers to enact evidence-based policies in the public interest. This protest involves the scientific community and its supporters calling out and asking for the public and government to support science and its common good by requiring evidence-based policies. They require scientists being in the political sphere to make these policies that shape every single one of our lives. Marches are challenging society to look anew at a particular issue. This was said by an analysis of the March for Science by David Neos, an attorney in Psychology Today. So even if an attorney can understand that politicization of science can be good, I feel like we should too. Marching occurs to raise awareness about an issue that's been overlooked, and science has clearly been overlooked. The scientific community seeks to sway and influence policy by becoming political. Finally, I would like to say that this is a founding pillar of our society. George Washington, our first president, declared in the first annual message to Congress in the State of the Union, "There is nothing which can better deserve your patronage than the promotion of science and literature. Knowledge is in every country the surest basis of public happiness." Wow. This is a pro-politicization of science stance done by one of our 4 founding fathers. It illustrates how the pursuit of knowledge through science is something our community has wanted to promote since its founding, and how this knowledge is valued as undeniably good. I mean, if you don't agree with me, can we just agree with George Washington? I mean, he is on our dollar bill. This, by far, is a desirable and needed issue to be politicized in order to further humanity and the greater good. Thank you.
Thank you. What was the time on that?
There were 26 seconds left.
26 seconds left? Okay, I didn't hear the one. Also yell out 30. I must be deaf.
I heard it. We did it telepathically.
Okay, good. Okay, Sarah, rock and roll.
You spoke about agreeing with George Washington. What do you have to say to the notion that George Washington was an avid slave owner?
I would say that we all make mistakes.
And how are you not certain that this is yet another one of George Washington's huge mistakes?
Because science has saved lives and will continue to save lives. There are, as I stated, 15 vaccines created in the 25 years that were all governmentally funded that have changed lives all over.
In the beginning of your speech, you mentioned that there's been a lot of progress in certain areas like gender studies, which happened because of involvement in politics. Can you please tell me what aspect of gender studies is science, or what do you call a scientist who studies domestic abuse?
I wouldn't. I would say that is my non-scientific evidence that I stated at the beginning of my brief, that I was going to give an example of an issue that's not necessarily political inherently, but needed to become political to save lives and help the greater good.
Are you aware that this debate is that the politicization of science is undesirable, not the politicization of women's rights?
I am, but it is nice to make parallels to make it understand it through multiple of issues, why politicization can be good and not necessarily evil.
You mentioned that a majority of the American people believe that science should be involved with politics. So my question to you is, does the fact that the people want something automatically make it desirable?
We are a democracy, so yeah, I would say so. If we're going to trust our whole nation to vote for presidents, vote for congressmen, then I think they should have the right to vote for whether politicization of science occurs.
So if so, how do you respond to such institutions such as that of slavery or eugenics, which the people all agreed with, but had to be outlawed because of the inherent undesirability?
I mean, we all used to be cavemen. We all used to swing our big clubs and hit each other on the head. We evolutionize, we adapt, we become smarter and make our country better. Yes, our country's had many mistakes, but it's also had a lot of triumphs. And in order to pursue forward, you have to look at your ugly mistakes in the face and move forward. And politicization of science is a way to do that.
You spoke about the FDA and certain vaccines and drugs being created because of through money that the government invested. Is there any evidence that the private sector is incapable of producing such vaccines and would not have done so should the government not have created it?
No, there are examples of that, but as you well may have heard, the EpiPen has been skyrocketed for profit. I don't think that being healed and having medicine should be in the for-profit institution. It should be for the people, which is what our government is. It is the government of the people.
How do you respond to claims that perhaps the free market and the private sector is a more pure form of the people's wants and desires than that of the government, who is meant to represent the people?
I mean, you can see the whole Occupy movement. Clearly, the 1% doesn't have 99% interest at heart, and I continue that into medical research as well. See the pharmaceutical industry.
Thank you. Okay, the chair now recognizes the deputy member of the government for a speech not to exceed 7 minutes. Here.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Cameron, and my partner Sarah already went over basically the criteria of our debate, so I would like to transition into my 3 main arguments. My first argument is science benefits from existing as its own entity. My second argument is politicizing science threatens its validity. And my third is that the politicization of science undermines its function as an objective resource. Now for my reasoning 1, under my first argument, Tim Wortstall, a staff writer for Forbes, expressed that in I skipped my reason 1. So reason 1 for science benefits from existing as its own entity is that private funding allows scientists to take risks without any political agenda. So, with that said, Tim Wortstall, a staff writer with Forbes, expressed that in 2003, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development published a paper on the sources of economic growth in OECD countries between 1971 and 1998, and found, to its surprise, that whereas privately funded research and development stimulated economic growth, publicly funded research had no economic impact whatsoever. Stanley Hyman, the director of the Stanley Center of Psychiatric Research, expressed that private philanthropy crosses borders easily. The most genetically diverse people in the world are in sub-Saharan Africa. We'd like to see what these genes teach us about the nature of mental illnesses, but it would take a huge administrative or bureaucratic effort to run federal grants there. We couldn't think of doing that without private money. So with this said, private funding helps pave the way for greater innovation and allows for scientists to research topics that are otherwise disregarded. Now, my second reason for why science benefits as its own entity is that government funding limits innovation. So according to a leading contributor to philanthropy.com, Michael Amp, states that the average age at which researchers receive their federal grant is 43.
5.
Private funds often help research centers support younger scientists with fresh ideas who haven't yet been able to tap into the federal grants pipeline. In an article written by Sarah Reardon for Nature News, the U.S. government surprised many researchers on October 17th when it announced that it will temporarily stop funding new research that makes certain viruses more deadly or transmissible. See, that might make sense, but Arturo Casa-Deval, a microbiologist at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine in New York, called the plan a knee-jerk reaction. There is really no evidence that these experiments are in fact such a high risk. A lot of them are being done by very respectable labs with lots of precautions in place. So, government funding research will inevitably be concentrated on the preoccupations of those who filter these research grants rather than on what the technology will produce the most worthwhile innovation. Philanthropists are not only filling in the gap in federal funding, but tackling the important work that is disregarded by the federal government due to this research being too unknown and experimental.
4.
So now for argument 2, which is politicizing science threatens its validity. My reason 1 for this is politicians cater to their own agendas and often, in the face of scientific fact, strong arm scientific discourse in their favor. So, in an independent global news site, Democracy Now!, they state that a new independent review has revealed extensive details on how members of the APA, American Psychological Association, were complicit in torture, lies, and covered up their close collaboration with officials at the Pentagon and CIA to weaken the association's ethical guidelines and allow psychologists to participate in government's enhanced interrogation programs after 9/11. Andrew Revkin from the New York Times highlighted that the top climate scientist at NASA says the Bush administration has tried to stop him from speaking out since he gave a lecture last month calling for prompt reductions in emissions of greenhouse gases linked to global warming.
3.
So we need to shield science, now more than ever, from the pressures put on by policymakers. Politicians come to their offices with strong agendas that often dangerously influence the objectivity behind science. So, for reason 2, when science is politicized, claims made in the name of science do not always follow the same rigid standards that true, fact-based science has set. With this said, journalist Judith Curry said that factiness is why using the veneer of science to rationalize an idea is dangerous, making the idea appear more justified than it really is. It is pro-science in appearance, but anti-science in spirit.
Good quote.
The Economics reported that APA psychologists indeed, far from upholding their Hippocratic oath, do not harm, APA psychologists did indeed work with officials for the Defense Department and the CIA to facilitate the torture of detainees.
Yeah.
Moving on, because I don't have much time. All right, so now for argument 3. Politicization of science undermines its function as an objective resource. So, reason 1, overwhelmed by so many unfounded political messages, the average American now judges and questions everything as replete with agenda, redefining the very definition of science to begin with, nonpartisan and objective. With this said, Asan Chowdhury, a writer from UT Health, said that politicization of science will only hurt its nonpartisan nature and will reinforce the incorrect notion that science is a special interest group, thereby increasing polarization. Also, Aaron Blake from the Washington Post stated that, according to the Washington Post, 8 in 10 Americans believe science has made life better for most people, but they still don't trust scientists and/or aren't aware of their consensus on many of the most important science-related issues of the day.
1.
And so basically, the United States has experienced exceptional levels of political change and unrest in the past year, increasing the divide that separates not only politicians, but everyday Americans as well. These divides contribute to an overall climate of mistrust from which science is not immune. The average American now judges and questions everything as replete with agenda, redefining the very definition of science to begin with, nonpartisan and objective. So my last reason is with so many alternative facts available, Americans are left to subjectively choose what they want to believe.
30.
So in conclusion, while 98% of scientists connected to the APA say they believe humans evolved over time, only 2/3, 66% of those overall perceive that scientists generally agree about evolution, according to a 2014 data from a recent Pew Research Center survey on science and society. Those in the general public who reject evolution are divided on whether there is a scientific consensus on the topic, with 47% saying scientists agree on evolution and 46% saying they do not. So my last thing before I get off is that in 2011, 69% of Americans believe that scientific facts were lies. So thus, Americans are left to choose what they want to believe and whose side of science best meets their own values and preferences.
That really is time.
Okay. So, on balance, you should vote for the government because all in all, private funding for science has a net benefit for society.
I now stand open
I now stand open
for
for
cross-examination and points of clarification. Okay, stand together, please. Thank you. So I can get you both in the frame. Yes, good. Perfect. A little closer. Camera on. Move over that way a little, both of you. Okay, good. Yeah, perfect. Rock and roll.
Hi, Cameron. What is the purpose of a for-profit company? What do they try to achieve?
A for-profit company?
Yes. Would it be to make money? Is that the purpose?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay. What is the purpose of government? Is it to make money?
Partially.
Would you say a better representation would be to represent the people and its interests?
Yes.
Okay. So do you see how there's a possible link of how a for-profit company doesn't really take the interests of the people as much as a government institute would? So if we look at funding for science, could you make the connection that maybe the government, when they fund science, has the interest of people, whereas companies have the interest in making money?
I guess you can say that, but the majority of what private funding does is give more opportunity to people that actually can't get federal grants. Oh, sorry, that can't get federal grants. And with that said, although, like, you can say that pharmaceuticals and stuff, like, spend money on certain, like, very specific things, as I mentioned earlier in my brief, basically the most genetically diverse people in the world are in sub-Saharan Africa, and what if the government's not going to fund this? They're not going to be able to treat people with mental health issues.
Over here.
And that's a broad thing for all people.
Thank you. Could you explain to me what a conflict of interest is? Briefly, if you can.
Okay, I would say that's basically when you have like two, I guess, parts of like a company, and then one company, like one part of the, like one person in the company kind of goes against like their general interest. It's kind of hard for me to explain. Like,
would you say like if a scientist who was funded by a private research found out research that would harm the company that was funding them, would there be a conflict of interest in that sense?
Yes.
Okay.
That makes sense.
My final, I guess, question is talking about the issue of trust. You said 8 out of 10 Americans don't trust scientists. Do you find it odd that even though 8 out of 10 Americans don't trust scientists, that still 76% of them want them to be involved in government? Why is that? If they don't trust scientists, why do they want them involved in government?
I guess because, I don't know.
Okay.
Sorry.
I mean, it's a tough question because even I don't know the answer. If the statistics are true, why don't they trust government? I don't know why they would want them in government. Trying to piggyback off something else you said. You guys talk a lot about the Bush administration. you even briefly brought over the Clinton administration, and you guys, Sarah talked about the Clinton administration. Do you feel like this is really the norm, that presidents are lying to the scientific community to push their political agendas?
I wouldn't necessarily say
That
it's the norm.
time?
Yeah.
Oh. Okay. To answer your question, I wouldn't necessarily say it's the norm, but I would say that science these days, and the reason why Americans have a distrust in science, is because time and time again, you have people in power pushing their political agendas.
Okay, thank you. Just a second now.
Let me know when you're ready, Professor.
Just a moment, please. I said just a moment.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. Chair now recognizes a deputy member of the opposition for a speech not to exceed 7 minutes in length. Here.
Jennifer, you ready? Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Alan, and I'm the deputy member of the opposition. For the first time I've ever seen this, we actually cited the same evidence, Sarah and I, and both to prove the point that politicians aren't educated. I also have the fact about 435 members of being in the House and only one of them having a PhD. And then I have actually further evidence to prove why politicians aren't educated on the matters of science. Lamar Smith serves as the chair of the Science, Space, Technology Committee, which has jurisdiction over the EPA, NASA, Department of Energy, National Science Foundation, the Federal Aviation Administration, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. He oversees science industries with the approximate budget of $40 billion. So you'd think that Lamar Smith would have some experience or expertise in science. Lamar Smith is a former attorney from Texas with absolutely no scientific background. His vice chair, you think maybe he's got the scientific background. He's a farmer. What am I trying to prove to you? That scientists have no education in, politicians have no education in science. We are both mentioning this point. What the government is trying to propose to you is the idea of the linear model. The linear model, as I define, is that scientists go out and get research from either private research or public research to find pure science, not interfering with political or private interests. And when they find this pure science, politicians who are now working in DC will take a look at that research and make decisions based on that research. But there's issues with the idea of the linear model. For starters, there is no such thing as pure science. Researchers often conflict with one another. And second, because the scientists are not actively involved with the politicians take a look at all the results and the data, but because they themselves have absolutely no expertise on the matter, they are forced to make policy decisions essentially on things that they don't know about. So that is the overwhelming issue with the linear model and why, as the opposition, we cannot support it. Brussels talks about the four points on the relationship between science and politics. Science is a fundamental pillar of knowledge-based societies. Science can help provide the evidence base for public policy, and sound public policy is crucial for the direction and priorities of science. The dialogue between science and policy is never straightforward, going on to this issue that there really is no pure science. Roger Pellick from the University of Colorado writes, instead of this futile effort to keep science and politics separate, it just makes more sense to ask scientists to engage more substantively in policy debate, but not by taking sides. We're not saying scientists should be partisan and push their own political agenda. Scientists should give policymakers, they should be the honest brokers, in which they give the policymakers a wide variety of options and tell you the pros and cons of each of the options, and then leave it to the politicians to make the decision for themselves. We're still allowing the politicians to make their policy, and we're still allowing the scientists to do the science, but because we're involving them with one another, because there's an active communication, we can enhance better policy decisions. The whole point of politicization of science is to further educate politicians. Only when the politicians are educated can they make better policy decisions. The linear model forces politicians to make decisions on things that they are not experts in. My final reasoning as to why politics and science cannot be separated is that the government funds and gives grants to major scientific projects. According to the American Association of Advancement in Science, the federal government pays almost $140 billion a year in research and development. And there's a concern because 80 cents of every dollar from the corporate research goes into development, whereas it's the other way around. 80 cents of every dollar given to from the government is in trying to find new innovation and trying to find the next cure for cancer. It's not trying to make a laptop a little faster. It's not going from an i5 processor to an i7 processor. They're trying to find new innovation, new cures, new cancers. That's what government funding of science does. Overall, I mean, I kind of vaguely went over my second argument already, but in the cross-examination. My second argument is in the past, science funded through private interests has led to biased science. In 1990, my first example is tobacco companies lying to its consumers saying cigarettes are healthy. In 1994, the top executives of the 7 largest tobacco companies testified in Congress that they did not believe cigarettes were addictive. There is no way that they didn't know that cigarettes were addictive. They even asked them, would you want your children to smoke? They said no. Why? Well, it's their decision, you know, if they wanted to smoke, it's on them, but I don't like smoking. You're the top of the head of the company for cigarettes. You think you'd at least like smoking. But the Public Health Institute reports that tobacco companies used clever advertising strategy, including alignment with physicians, cementing the notion that smoking was actually healthy. If you were fat and the doctor said you wanted to lose weight, they prescribe you a carton of cigarettes saying, yeah, cigarettes help you lose weight. They also kill you, but that part's not important. My second reasoning is that clinical trials have often been changed and edited in order to trick the consumer. There's an inherent issue when a pharmaceutical company is the one conducting their own clinical trials. They'll show research that's saying, this medicine helps reduce the size of tumors by 50%. Well, that statistic might be true, and the information on the clinical trial might show that, but what the clinical trial won't focus on is, well, did the guy survive or not? He could have shrunk the tumor by 50%, but he still ended up dying. What's the point of the medicine altogether?
Why?
That's how pharmaceutical companies, and how if you're in control of your own clinical trial, you can manipulate the data in order to show facts like tumors are shrinking by 50%. Finally, I really want to touch up on the most important of this issue is that there is an alternative. There's a way you can have a public, nonpartisan funding. And we mentioned this at the OTA. It was established in 1972. It was half from the Senate, half from the House of Representatives, half from the majority party, half from the minority party. That way there is no partisanship involved. This was an organization which I mentioned earlier, had an open channel of communications with scientists and politicians, and then once they had a variety of options, they presented those options to the politicians, saying, this is the pros and cons of option 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You guys make the decisions because you guys are the politicians. That's what you guys are getting paid for. But because there was this open communication, the OTA worked on over 700 studies, including Alzheimer's to acid rains, and helped educate scientists on matters of, helped educate politicians on matters of science. I now stand open for cross-examination and points of clarification.
Thank you. Chair will now hear a cross-examination. Not to exceed 3 minutes. Please stand close together. Thank you. By the way, Cameron, we have something in speech called the power stance, which is feet wider than your shoulders, so you're like a tripod, so you're powerful. There you go. Good. Yeah. That's very powerful. Good.
So, in your reasoning
Over
one
here,
of,
Cameron.
can I start? Okay. So, in his reasoning one of argument 1, you state that politicians must be educated on the topics they are making policy decisions for. With that said, I'm now going to ask a couple yes or no questions. So, would you say scientists are experts in making policy decisions?
No.
Now, would you say politicians are experts in making policy decisions?
Yes.
So, shouldn't we allow the scientists to do what they do best, science, and have politicians stay in the realm and stick to politics?
Yes.
So, you acknowledge that our present-day politicians are not qualified to make science-based decisions, but should be one day. Given that we live in the present day and not in the future, do you think our current politicians should rely on present-day facts from professional scientists when making these decisions?
Yes.
Power stance.
I mean, short answer, yes, they should look at facts. Whether or not they do or not, that's the real question. I would say that they don't. That's why scientists need to be more involved.
So, do you think that Scott Pruitt, who's our current head of EPA, should base his decisions on scientific fact?
Yes.
Okay. Given that he is not doing so, as science has confirmed global warming, can you acknowledge that our current politicians should not be making these decisions on scientific matters on behalf of the whole country?
If science has proved global warming, as you say, then yes, they should look at science facts. That's a whole other debate all in all, which I won't get into, though.
So your argument states that the whole point of the politicization of science is to further educate. In the meantime, a small number of uneducated politicians are making decisions for the whole country. Shouldn't those who are already educated be given this responsibility?
When I mean to educate, I mean to give the politicians the option to choose between like different policy options. Because they're uneducated, that's why they need that. But if they were educated, they wouldn't need those options to begin with. But,
Okay, so is it yes or no? What do you think?
Can you repeat the question then? I kind of forgot.
So in the meantime, well, shouldn't those who are already educated be given this responsibility?
Educated in what?
Educated in science.
So you've
been saying that politicians have not been educated in science properly.
Correct.
So shouldn't you leave it to the people that are science?
So you're saying scientists should be the ones making the policy decisions? Isn't that the whole point of politicization of science?
I'm supposed to be asking you the questions. Anyways, so shouldn't politicians defer power to those who are educated rather than fabricating their own uneducated opinions despite already researched facts?
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah. I mean,
Continue.
yeah, I agree that politicians should not be the ones conducting their own science because they're not experts in science. They should look to scientists, but whether or not they should be separated, whether or not scientists shouldn't be involved in the political process, that's what we disagree on. This is the whole debate on. I think scientists should be involved because that's the only way you can educate the politicians.
Thank
Thank you for your
you.
time, Alan.
They say I disagree because
Okay, the chair will now hear a rebuttal from the leader of the government, or a four-part rebuttal that includes,
they say
she said, I disagree because, therefore, yeah. Okay, just a moment, please. Okay, rock and roll. Sarah?
They say companies have the interest of making money while governments have the best interest of the people. They say companies have the interest of making money and not the interest of the people. We disagree. Why? Because of capitalism and the free market. In a capitalist society, which we are, the only way that private companies can make money is if they create something that caters to the good of the people. The only way they'll make money is if they put something on the market that the people want and the people will buy. Otherwise, they won't make money. Therefore, they do have the interests of the people at heart. Secondly, they say that the March for Science had, I think, 100,000 people expressing their concern of why science and politics should still be one and why they should fight for one another. We disagree because there are 330 million people in the United States, not 100,000 people, most of whom did not walk in the March for Science. We also disagree because half the country did indeed vote for Donald Trump, and thus the whole notion that Trump's decisions with science will be harmful and the whole country disagrees with this is completely flawed. They say that the National Cancer Institute receives its budget from the U.S. Congress and should continue to do so, and if the politicization of science is undesirable, then this will not be the case. We disagree because cancer research is not something that's politicized. Politicized means open to debate. No one is arguing that we should stop funding cancer research or that cancer is good. We all agree that cancer is bad and we're all trying to help work towards a cure. Therefore, we disagree that cancer research and things of this nature fall into the politicization of science. I yield the rest of my time.
How much did she use?
There was 1 minute and 15 seconds left.
Wow. Okay, thank you. Okay. Just a moment, please. Okay. Okay, the chair will now hear the leader of the opposition for 4 steps of refutation, not to exceed 3 minutes in length. Begin.
First of all, I would like to clarify first the definition of politicization. We both agreed at the very beginning, they just said that politicize is defined as a discussed and argumentative issue. At the beginning of the debate, we determined that politicization has to do with anything being put into the inner workings of government. Therefore, I disagree with the definition that Sarah just gave in her refutation because we didn't agree on that in the first place. Second of all, they say that the privatization of scientific research is a good thing. I disagree. Because as we can see from tobacco companies, no matter what capitalism says, some companies don't really care about what the good is for the people. They care about what is good for their wallets. Tobacco companies, at the end of the day, will sell their cigarettes to anyone they can, no matter how many health detrimental issues take hand. However, the government was the one that made them put warning labels on the cigarettes. It was the government that made taxes higher on cigarettes than others to deter people from using them. However, they still give us a choice because we live in a government that is for the people. It is not a dictatorship. We listen to our constituents and we try to do what's best. It's true, Trump was elected. However, I disagree that everyone agrees with him now because you can look at poll numbers, see very clearly that a lot of people do not. At the end of the day, this is about politicization of science. We live in a research institution right here, right now. Without the politicization of science, there wouldn't be any more government funding. Without government funding, much of our research at UCLA would not occur. So I beg of you, for the good of people where in National Cancer Institute is a scientific research funded by the government, to continue this research, to continue the good for humanity and the good for the people. So I beg of you to vote for the opposition so we continue government-funded scientific research in order to continue the good for the people and as well as continue a great America. Thank you.
Thank you. The chair will now hear from the deputy member of the government for a rebuttal of refutation in 4 steps, not to exceed 3 minutes in length.
So they say that politicians aren't educated on the topics they make policies for. I disagree because I earlier stated how the Bush administration stopped a top climate scientist at NASA for speaking out on the emission of greenhouse gases linked to global warming. Therefore, Bush was properly educated enough to realize that this didn't coincide with his political agenda. They say that private companies focus their attention on trivial things like pharmaceuticals. I disagree because, as said earlier, philanthropy crosses borders easily, and the director of the Stanley Center for Psychiatric Research said that the genes in sub-Saharan Africa are the most diverse. Their genes could teach us a lot about the nature of mental illnesses. So would you consider this research not for the greater good of society? Therefore confirming our original value of utilitarianism, doing the most good to the most amount of people? They say that the OTA was the pinnacle of success for public nonpartisan science research. I disagree because their very own government, the United States, deemed them expendable and unnecessary and decided to cut the program because it was a waste of taxpayer money. How could something so vital be cut? Therefore, the OTA, the opposition's only example of the public nonpartisan committee, just got debunked. Part 4. They say that our politicians are not educated. Oh, I got that. My bad. Hold up.
My bad?
Yep. So many seconds.
Okay, I bad. Okay. What's the time?
1 minute, 20 seconds.
Oh yeah, here we go. They say that our politicians are not educated about the policies they could be. I disagree because there is no proof that our country prioritizes education in the politicians we vote for in office. Professional scientists study their whole lives to be experts in their fields, and politicians do not have this kind of time. Therefore, given we're not living in an imaginary future of PhD politicians, but are in fact living in the real world of partisan politicians, we believe that science should be kept in the hands of those who are informed on the facts and disseminated to the public in that light. So what this debate comes down to is the question of whether you believe that scientific research can thrive on its own. The answer to this question is yes, because private funding, A, has exponentially grown due to philanthropic donations, B, private funding helps pave the way for greater innovation due to scientists being free from political constraints, and C, the politicization of science undermines its function as an objective resource. Ultimately, we have here two options. We have private funding with all the benefits I've already listed, and then we have public science that further clouds validity by pushing political agenda. The choice is yours. And I don't need to beg, because I have a strong argument.
Thank you. I beg to propose. Thank you.
All right.
The chair will now hear the final refutation from the deputy member of the opposition.
What did you say?
He's not, you gotta be using notes.
Let me know whenever.
Okay. I'd be ready.
Ready?
Yeah.
I'm ready? Okay. They say that private funding of science benefits society as a whole. We disagree. Because when McDonald's was cutting corners and ensuring that their meat essentially killed people, were they doing it for the benefit of society? Or were they doing it to have a cheaper meat, a cheaper product, to gain more money? There's an inherent interest in a company, and that is to make money. We have to establish that one thing. And yes, there might be instances of one philanthropic company funding some science, but they do not have the money to fund the entirety of science. Over 60%, more than 60% of all science funding comes from federal grants. If you eliminate that 60%, there is no way science can survive on its own. They say that Bush was very well educated on the matter of psychology and intentionally used that to push his political agenda. We disagree. It's because Bush was uneducated on the issue of psychology and the issue of torture that he did such a rash decision and pushed his political agenda. If he had any actual education on the ramifications of his actions, he wouldn't have done those actions. It is inherently because of his stupidity, essentially, that he did those actions. And, I mean, I have nothing against Bush and anything else, but come on. They've essentially made this debate into whether or not private science is better or if public science is better. But you have to take it from the scientist's point of view. These scientists aren't some people living in a high ivory tower. They feel the ramifications of the policies that come into effect. And just like any other citizens, they should have an influence on those policies. Grassroots movements. Those are movements where people have a say and influence policies. So why is it that just because they're scientists, they should have no say in what gets passed? Especially on matters of scientific importance. If something in regards to climate change, something in regards to technology comes to place, scientists should have their say in it. I'm not saying scientists should be the ones making policy decisions, but they should say, hey, you guys don't have no expertise, here are the options. You guys can decide based on the options that we have provided. That is our definition of politicization of science. We're not saying partisanship is good. We're not saying a Democrat scientist is good or a Republican scientist is good. What we're saying is that in essence, scientists should be involved in the inner workings of government, which is how we have defined politicization of science. Overall, or overwhelming evidence proves, private funding of science biases science. They're trying to find this pure science. Well, private funding isn't going to find it. The public, the whole purpose of government is to benefit the society and the people that they represent. So it makes sense that the public funding of science would benefit the scientific community as a whole as well. Ultimately, as she says, the choice is yours. Have a great day.
Thank you very much. I invite the rhetorical gladiators to cross the house, shake hands, and congratulate each other on a wonderful debate. And now it's time for the judges to do their duty, their job.
What a debate, guys. What a debate. What a debate. That's all I gotta say.
I had to respond to the budget.
Without hitting me.
I had a perfect response to the budget. Just trash on me.